Three is this camera, right? Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the World View TV talk show. I am your host, Pastor M. Ziddy Hamathiite, and we're grateful to be here on today as we talk about the psycho-spiritual insights to movies. And I'm excited to have this young man with me on today. Pastor Joshua Sharon is my guest on today, and I'm going to let him tell who he is in deeper context. But I'm grateful to have him as my guest on today. As today we're going to talk about the movie Black Panther, and we're doing Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which is technically Black Panther 2. Yes. So, Pastor Joshua, as I know you, welcome to the show. Tell a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you came from, how long you've been preaching, and then we'll get into what we want to talk about today.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Pastor Joshua Sharon from Brooklyn, New York, the greatest borough, I could say. I've come from a ministry family, fifth generation on my mom's side, fourth generation on my dad's side. So, like my grandmother said, she said, you couldn't try not to be a preacher. But I've been preaching for about, since the age of 16. So now I'm 28 years old, but I've been preaching for a little while now. And you definitely have been one of the mentors who've seen me start and, continue preaching. And, we've known each other for a long, long time. So glad to be here, glad to be on the show and glad for us to dive right into this.
Amen. Yeah. How long you been preaching?
Let's see. So have to be about maybe 13 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. Because I preached my first sermon at 8, but I took it seriously at 16.
Wow, you making me feel old. I remember when you was 13. You talk about you preaching for 13 years.
Yeah.
That's great. And, well, I'm glad to have you on part of the show.
Glad to be here.
And I wanted to get a young person's perspective. I'm shocked that I'm saying that because I used to be the young person that they got the young person's perspective from. But I'm honored to have you with us on the show.
Glad to be here.
And such a different point of view, other than just coming to talk about the Bible like they get most preachers to do.
Right.
The Lord gave this show to me in terms of something that I've been doing for years. I've always been a movie buff. It was my downtime. And so for years, I ministered with young people, gang members, through movies.
Wow.
And the Lord showed me something through the years, and I just did it as part of not just the entertainment segment.
Of course.
Now, I'm not one of those that go to movies and that I'm pointing out all this stuff while we're watching the movie.
Right.
I watched the movie for entertainment.
Of course.
And then after the first time, then the second time, I use it for its psycho-spiritual point of view because they bring this out in a lot of movies.
Of course.
And what triggered this in me really started years ago where they used to have something called History versus Hollywood.
Okay.
And then they had another segment around Halloween time, and it was called Haunted Hollywood. And they would give the backdrop history of what took place in those movies, how they made them, and the troubles that took place in the Haunted Hollywood. And then in the History versus Hollywood, they gave the segment of what was partly history, the real history of it, and what was actually fictional.
Right.
And I started doing it, and since my background, other than pastoring, is counseling, and I got my master's from Fordham University in the Bronx in pastoral counseling.
Okay.
So I started gravitating towards, what's the psycho-spiritual perspectives, insights to what movies are trying to relate to us? And therefore, this got birth, and I started doing shows, and then this became something that came up.
Of course.
And we all are familiar with Black Panther.
Right.
It revolutionized us, even though I grew up when comic books was out, and that wasn't one of my favorite comic books. Not because he was black, I didn't like who he had to fight. Stan Lee and them had Black Panther fighting gorillas and lions and
Right.
jungle people.
Of course.
And I wanted him to fight along. And so, it's those things. So I really wasn't a favorite. But now, since it's become a phenomenon,
Right.
everyone's talked about Black Panther, the first movie.
Right.
But I want to delve into what's the psycho-spiritual insights to Black Panther 2. Black Panther 2, better known as Black Panther Wakanda Forever,
Right.
came out in 2022.
Yes.
It was written, directed by Ryan Coogler, and black fella who has done phenomenal
Yes.
with this.
Absolutely.
There has been some interesting points. He has been dealing into different religious aspects where he brings different religious views into the movie that we kind of want to talk about today.
Of course.
And so it's one of those powerful shows, but it has a lot of spiritual backdrops.
Yes. Yes, it does.
It has a lot of psychological backdrops. And so let me start by asking you, when you saw the movie,
Right.
what was your overall take of the movie in general?
Well, when I saw the movie, I had to watch it. Like you said, you had to watch it twice. I got to watch it twice because I was like, what was it again? Because we know about the first one, but the second one is a very different storyline. My overall take of the second movie was I felt like it was a great movie, but it was hard for me to really enjoy because I really enjoyed the first one. But the second movie, I really think was a great movie. Definitely had a storyline that was understandable because when you look at the movies now, it's so many storylines where you get confused, and at the end, you're like, what was it? What was it about again?
Right.
But yes, but I definitely enjoyed the overall. I definitely enjoyed the movie. It was good to see all of the character development from the first one. It was good to see the storyline continue and continue in a new way, but not be boring or try to just take out what was in the first one and put in the second one. So that was a good storyline. So I really enjoyed that part of the aspect of that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your, what did you relate to in the movie?
There's many parts that I relate to. I think one of the parts that I relate to was when the daughter and the queen were at the beach, and she said we have to burn our mourning clothes, and I related to that part because last year when I had to bury my grandmother, I remember I had to get over the mourning period, and that part I understood because there are moments where you do mourn, but then you have to move forward. And sometimes when you go through those grief moments, you want to stay stuck in those moments, but you have to move forward. So that was one part I could relate to. Another one I could relate to was when she was on the throne and when the warrior came back and told her, I lost the princess, and she got angry.
Yeah.
And she was like, I lost my son. I lost my daughter now. And she told her, you're relieved of your duties. That was grief. And that's the thing I understood because there are moments when you grieve and you're like, I can't take it anymore.
Right.
So I remember 10 years ago, 2013, lost my grandfather. I lost a cousin right after that, then lost an aunt that year. So I was like, how much more can I go through? Yeah. So I relate to that because that is something that we all go through,
Let's park the car there for a minute.
Yeah.
Because as young preachers, as young pastors,
right,
being in leadership role is parallel in a lower scale than being the queen of we know this is a fictitious country, but still the concept of being queen of a country and having so much on them, you have to be able to have certain level of image, panache to your image, even while grieving.
Of course.
You have to represent and you have to have this kind of standard that the people are still looking at. We don't talk much as clergy about how do we process the grief and still lead.
That's a very good question. When I look at all of the things that people talk about grief, they really don't understand grief. You don't understand grief unless you go through it. And what thing it is about grief is when you lose someone and you're in leadership, you have to deal with the people that lost that person, then your own personal loss that you feel. Like 3 years ago, my childhood friend died in a car crash.
My God.
So I'm thinking maybe he's alive. And the next day I found out the car crash killed him. So I'm calling the mother and calling the grandmother, just wish my condolences, and just saying I'm sorry, talking to them, and that was it. But then when I spoke to my mom, she said, "No, tell them, make sure pastor and you'll eulogize." I then had to change my hat from a sad friend to now pastor role to say I can come minister to you and help. And then when I went to their house the day before the funeral, I sat with the grandmother. She told me the stories and how he grew up, and I remember because we were childhood friends. And then the mother was like, "I just left the funeral home," and then she was crying. So I sat with the family as they were talking to me, and I was like, the average person would have just been like, "I'm just gonna go to the funeral and preach." But you have to sit with them and hear them and see them cry, see them hurt, because you hurt as well.
Right.
And it's like when he said Jesus wept, and people don't understand is that when it comes to Lazarus, we never hear about Lazarus doing something in the scriptures. We never see him, do things like Moses or Elijah. But the thing
We
is
don't even
that
know
he
who he
was,
is,
yeah,
right?
we know who he is,
Jesus'
but we know
friend.
that he was just Jesus' friend,
Right.
And he cried because the sister said to him, "If he was not here, if you were not here, this wouldn't happen," and all that kind of stuff. But she's speaking from frustration, and we as pastors, as leaders, we have to realize that we hurt as well.
Absolutely.
And that's the part where we try to act like, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm okay." No, there's moments where we hurt, and the hurt is so deep to where we're like, "Okay, I need God's strength to get me through this." So I'm not gonna break down in front of the people, but they understand that yes, I'm hurting, but I also have to kind of turn off my emotion a little bit in order to minister.
And that's a point there. Because I think at some point we have gotten carried away with cutting off our emotions in order to minister
Right.
too much.
Oh yeah,
Until we have unfortunately made people put us on a pedestal that we're not human.
that's true.
We have a human side. And what I like about Queen Wamanda,
Right,
she displayed her humanness
absolutely.
and grief.
Right,
And she also displayed it, she did it so well. She displayed it as a human being
Right.
who's lost everything.
right,
But then she displayed it as a leader, as the
Right.
queen, who was reprimanding her captain of the guards
of course.
because she was not in favor of that happening from the beginning.
Absolutely.
But there's something else that took place in that. There was a missing link that neither one of them knew about at first.
Okay.
The missing piece to the puzzle was the captain didn't lose her the way they assumed,
Of course.
the way she assumed, the way the queen assumed,
Right, the way everyone else is.
because Princess literally, Shuri,
Right, sure, yeah.
volunteered
And gave herself up.
and gave herself up.
Right,
So they were unaware of that.
of course.
The danger we face in leadership is making decisions
Right.
on misinformation.
It's true. That's true. That's true.
And when it's being made out of emotional catharsis, can be even more dangerous.
Absolutely.
So it was the challenge of all of that nestled in together, which is just human,
Right. Right.
which is what we don't like talking about. And I understand because I came up in an era, born in the 70s.
Right.
I came from the backdrop of the aftermath of the civil rights movement of the
Right.
60s. Dr. King was assassinated 3 years before I was born.
Wow.
So I've heard about it, watched it,
Right.
but didn't understand it in full.
Of course.
I came in when they was having still that understanding, be seen and not heard from young people.
Of course.
And all of that mixed to how if you show your emotions as a leader, you're showing weakness.
Right.
But we always forgot.
Right.
We preached about it, but we've forgotten. That one scripture verse that teaches us of the shortest verse in the entire scriptures we know, John 11:35.
Right.
Jesus wept.
Right. Right.
And we have to balance out how to deal with grief. I concur
Right.
with you on the grief. And yes, we've been through COVID. I buried a few members, and a lot of our
Tons of
pastors
people,
and
yeah.
tons of folks died.
70 pastors in Brooklyn.
Yes. But I'm going back before COVID.
Right.
My greatest challenge in pastoring, when I pastored the First Church, Gethsemane Baptist Church,
Yes.
for 14 years, my greatest challenge, I was 33 years old. 33, 35, I'm forgetting the age now, the year. But in 2005, that was the year,
Okay.
was the worst year in my existence.
Why is that?
2005, my first cousin on my father's side, who I grew close to, his children are my godchildren.
Right.
I got a lot of godchildren, but these are two. And his sister, my cousin,
Right.
died in April of 2005. My aunt, who was a member of my church and the sister to my mother, died November of 2005.
Right.
And I had to preach her eulogy. Not only as an aunt, but I had to preach as her nephew. I had to preach her eulogy as her pastor.
I'm glad we're talking about this. Yeah.
2 weeks later, my cousin,
Right.
Reverend Macmillan, passed.
Ooh. My goodness.
And I had to be there at the very church I'm pastoring now at Wayside for the funeral.
Right.
Never had a conversation really
Of course.
about how to deal with that pain. But I had to deal with it.
Right.
And at the same time, I was also in school working on my master's.
Right.
And I was also pastoring Gethsemane Baptist Church at the time. I literally took 2 years off
Wow.
because it was so much in 2005.
I can understand. I can imagine that. I can imagine that.
My emotions was everywhere.
Of
But
course.
I was a young man who didn't know how to deal with emotions.
Right.
I grew up as a fan of Mr. Spock, where I was spiritual and emotional at the same time.
Right.
So, therefore, all of that
Comes in.
was my first time dealing with emotions
Of course.
at the worst time in my life.
Absolutely.
And I had counselors and everything, but it was something that I had to live through and learn how to deal with
Right.
because the way I was taught wasn't equaling out what I had to face.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, yeah, that for that I know how it felt
Right.
to watch Queen Ramonda deal with that.
Right.
And then she said something that was powerful. She said, and I'm paraphrasing a little.
Right.
She said when they was trying to give an excuse for the captain of the guard, hey, she stood with you when she was with the country, Wakanda, when she had went against her husband.
Right.
And Queen Ramonda said, but she can see her husband at any time.
Right.
My husband, my son,
Right.
is with the ancestors.
Yes.
Who do I have? And now my daughter is missing?
Yeah.
That was hard.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That was harder, I believe, than King Chitaka. I can't get his name right. T'Challa,
Yeah.
who had to deal with, I have a cousin now that I didn't know of, and found out that my father killed his father,
Right.
his own brother,
Right.
for Wakanda.
Right.
And then he had to deal with fighting against his own blood cousin
Right.
for the kingdom, and he almost died then.
Right. Right.
That was harder now for Queen Ramonda to deal with this.
Because she had to deal with all that loss.
Yes.
And loss, you see, loss takes you to a place you never knew you could be.
Absolutely.
And there's a difference when people don't realize when you're at a homegoing service, a funeral, whatever. It's different when you know the person. You have to eulogize them. If we go to a funeral home, we don't know the person. We can speak a few words, leave. When you know the person, spent time with them, been around them, and spent so many hours with that person, then when they pass, it's a shock.
Yeah.
And it hits you like you've never been hit before. Because last year, when the sermonic solo was being sung, I'm sitting in the chair. I know I have to eulogize my grandmother because she told me 2 weeks after my grandfather passed, she said, I want you to do it. And I told her I'm not going to do it. But she said, I want you to do it. I'm sitting there, and in my mind, I'm like, all right, my grandfather's going to get up and eulogize. Oh, my brother's going to eulogize. Okay, my uncle. Well, my uncle passed 2 years after my grandfather. My grandfather passed in 2013. I'm like, oh, my brother's sitting next. I'm like, oh, I have to do it. So when they look at the video, I'm walking slow. And it's what I was, because I'm like, I really got to do this.
Right.
And in your mind, you're like, I have to work through that and preach through it. And it's not where it's just a bunch of people, oh, like this. No, these are pastors that are here. Some pastors asking me, are you sure you need to do this? Are you sure? I already got that in my mind. I have to go think through this. I got some people who know I do and know that I was preaching. Some people say, is there a typo in the program? All of that in my mind as I'm standing up there and working through it. And that loss that you go through is painful. And it's painful when you see loss happening so much.
Yeah.
And that's when COVID really destroyed a lot of people because you had death on top of death on top of death. You wake up in the morning, 10 people died. Yeah. You go get lunch at 12 o'clock, a bunch of people died. Yeah. Dinner time, it was death on top of death on top. And when you deal with that much, it's like, God, where are you?
It made you realize what it does.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you come to grips with how short life can be.
Oh, my goodness.
2, it makes you search for who you are.
It's true.
Because it forces you into a area of your life where now you can't hide behind trying to understand how to get through this pain.
Right.
How do I stand and remain standing through the pain?
It's true.
How do I move forward? And so it gets you to reevaluate and revisit and take survey on your own life.
Right.
Because you have to find that inner strength and inner identity.
Right.
Before the enemy within you disturbs the inner you.
It's true.
I can't repeat that.
Oh, no, it's true.
But that's what it makes you do.
Absolutely.
And so that's the deal. And, and as we're on this subject within this confines of this movie, I want to move it into the fact that they had 2 funerals.
Right.
In the royal family. And Shiri had to deal with it. But before we get to Shiri, just overall.
Right.
And I want to kind of jump back in time.
Right. To
where King T'Challa came on.
Yeah.
In Civil War, Captain America Civil War.
Yes.
Is when he first got introduced.
Yes.
When his father died.
Right.
Black Panther that he had to now become, but while he's the prince dealing with the death of his father, remember out in the park, Black Widow came to him and said, how do you deal with this? With death. And he said, we view death differently. We see death as a transition.
Right. Right.
Talk to me a little bit about the parallels you picked up and how they see death in Wakanda, which is really the African thing,
Right.
to the real African understanding,
Yeah.
versus how the Western world taught us in Christendom how to see death.
Yes. So when we think of death from the aspect of Black Panther, that when he says death is a transition, that is showing us death that we see as Christians. Because whenever we see people die, they're like, oh my God, I'll never see them again. Or, oh my God, that's it. But we know as believers, death is a new beginning. And when we look at that, that gives us strength because we know that they're in another place. But we know that their body is here on earth, but their spirit is well alive in heaven. And when I didn't understand it was when 10 years ago my grandfather passed. 2015 I was asleep. And I was in my house in a dream. And I saw my grandfather sitting at the table. And I was opening up a fridge and I said, wait, am I seeing what I'm seeing? And I said, Gramps, that you? He said, yes, and he looked happier. He looked like he was smiling, and he didn't look stressed out like he was when he was here. And we're having a conversation. I said, how are you feeling? He said, I feel more alive than ever.
My.
I said, how do you feel? I said, I want you to come back. He said, where I am is way better than earth. He said, if you just knew the joy I feel. He said, I've never felt joy like this before. And I was like, what? And I said, what made you come down? Oh, I just wanted to come down and just talk to you for a little bit. And I was like, what? And he said, and then we were talking, and I said, what made you come down? He said, God just wanted me to just tell you something. And what? He said, you're going to be all right. Everything's going to be good. And I woke up from that dream, and before I woke up, I said, where you going? He said, I'm going back up. He said, because where I am is amazing. He said, but you're going to be just fine. And I woke up, I was in tears, and I was like, man, wow. Because we think death is but they're in another place.
Absolutely.
And we don't understand that. But when we look at it, that is what happens.
Absolutely.
And when we understand life is more bigger than just, okay, funerals, that's it. But when you realize that they're in another place, you're like, wow, this is what I've been reading. This is what I've been understanding. And that's the thing that's beautiful too. And that's not, I've had several family members who passed away, and I've seen them in a dream that I'm like, I understand it now.
Yeah. And that's part of what happened in all the movies with Black Panther, where it was the understanding of they went into the spirit realm.
Right.
And so we're grateful how that we really need more time to finish this.
Yeah, of course.
And so if it's all right with you,
Yeah.
I want to be able to bring you back on
Absolutely.
this show, and we want to be able to talk about this in a deeper perspective because I think it's something we need to do.
Of course.
Thank you again, Pastor.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Joshua,
Yes.
Sharon, for being on here
course.
on the World View TV talk show.
Yes.
We are excited to be able to talk about Black Panther, Wakanda Forever.
Yes.
You can be able to view this wonderful show and with our guests, and we look forward to continuing to have this conversation. Until we meet again, thank our audience.
Yes,
thank
thank you.
the Worldview TV talk show for this opportunity. Thank you. Until we meet again, remember, there is a psycho-spiritual insight
Yes.
to all movies, and we want to be the one to have that conversation. Thank you so much. Till we meet again.